The first 5 episodes of Mars Ravelo's Darna are finally available for streaming, so here's my review of the first 5 episodes of Darna. Spoilers ahead. What I liked about this show is the cast, specifically Jane De Leon and Zijan Haranilla as Narda and Ding. Most of the emotional core of the show comes from those two, and I'd say they do a pretty good job at portraying this older sister, younger brother dynamic, especially when it comes to the emotional scenes. I've seen some people say that Jane doesn't give off the Darna vibe, or they don't see her as Darna, but I think she works really well, and if you think about it, it's kinda the point. She's someone who also doesn't see herself as a superhero. Her version of Darna is someone who knows how to fight, but still makes mistakes and gets beaten up. She's someone trying to live up to another hero's legacy, someone who isn't ready, but tries. Compare that to the other versions of Darna who were also graceful and immediately look the part. Her version is a lot more relatable. Another thing I liked is some of the updates they gave to the lore, like the idea of Lenore, Narda's mother, being the first Darna and possibly naming her child after the name of her superhero alter ego is a lot better than just having Narda shout her name backwards. It's honestly a lot less ridiculous that way. Now that we've discussed the positives, let's get into the negatives. I think what really hurts this show is the teleserye format. Teleseries require you to pump out new episodes every day, 5 times a week, so that means they have to stretch out storylines as much as they can. It took us 5 episodes for Narda to finally become Darna. The teleserye format also affects things like special effects and costumes. It's 2022 and our costumes and effects are still at Power Rangers level. I know this show was made during the pandemic. I know there's probably an entire room of VFX artists who worked real hard on this show, and that our budget will probably never be as high as shows from Hollywood, but there are ways to work around this. When the movie Jaws was being made, they didn't have the budget to always show the shark, so they worked around it by showing the shark less, and using things like POV shots of the shark. That way the effect doesn't suffer and we still get that eerie feeling that something is watching in the water. If the budget was truly a problem, then why not make less episodes? That way you could focus your budget on much more important stuff like costumes and effects. Make this show a weekly release, and that way your effects will be able to support the story that you're trying to tell. Plus, the story doesn't have to suffer because you're not always trying to stretch out the plot. In this day and age, we've seen superhero stories done so many times, and we want this show to be able to compete with some of the other shows in the same genre. We're not asking for movie level effects. We just need something decent, like say, the first season of The Flash. The Flash now isn't the show it used to be, but the first season had some of the best VFX shots of any comic book show at the time. And part of that was because they knew when and where to use CGI. Look up any VFX content creator on TikTok and I guarantee you'll find someone who can at least come close to movie level effects. And that's someone who probably doesn't have the same budget that this show has. All I'm saying is, I see the potential this show has. We got some really talented people working on this show, and I think if we would just handle certain things about this show a little better, then we could have a show that we could be proud to call our own. So what are your thoughts on Darna? If you made it this far and haven't seen Darna despite the spoiler warning, you guys can stream Mars Ravelo's Darna for free on iwanttfc.com. The second and third week of Mars Ravelo's Darna is now available for streaming, so here's my review of weeks 2 and 3 of Darna. Spoilers ahead. Let's start with week 2. After 5 episodes of waiting, Narda is finally Darna, but unfortunately, she spends all of week 2 as Narda, contemplating on whether or not she should be Darna, which I found to be quite dragging. I know it's part of her character to doubt herself, but imagine waiting 5 episodes to see Narda finally turn into Darna, only to find out that you have to wait another week before she turns into Darna again. I know Joss Whedon ain't exactly the most admirable person to be quoting right now, but he once said that the reason it was so difficult to make a Hulk movie was because you have a character who spends most of the movie trying not to turn into the thing people want him to turn into, which is the Hulk. But the thing is, Darna isn't the Hulk, so I see no purpose in depriving the audience of Darna other than to stretch out the plot, which week 2 is definitely guilty of. Week 2 also focuses a lot more on Narda and Brian's relationship, as well as Regina's brewing jealousy towards Narda, which I gotta say is undercooked. Other than being good looking, we don't really know why Regina would like this dude. Most of their scenes together have been mostly business, no scenes of them outside of work, so you don't really get where all of this is coming from. With Narda and Brian, you could kinda see it because they got that playful banter going on. But with Regina, you don't get any of that. Janella is a fantastic actress, but she shines a lot more in week 3, especially in the Mang Roger scene from episode 12. I just wish she was given better material consistently. Speaking of Week 3. Week 3 is where the show really picks up the pace and starts feeling like a superhero show. We see more of Darna and the plot actually moves forward. Something Week 2 and 3 both got right were the villains. The villains were honestly pretty good. 3 out of 4 of them at least. Lindolman and Mang Roger were surprisingly decent villains. Filipino supervillains tend to have very shallow goals, like wanting to rule over the world or whatever. But the villains from Week 2 and 3, except for Master Claudio, were pretty well written and had understandable goals. Lindolman, despite the terrible supervillain name, was just a guy trying to expose some really bad people. He didn't ask for superpowers he couldn't control, nor did he want his family to be put in danger because of the people coming after him. He was just a victim. Mang Roger, like Lindolman, was also a victim, and he gave us one of the more tense scenes in the whole series, which, like I said, gave Janela Salvador a chance to really shine. But despite 3 decent villains, we got one villain who was flat out written terribly, and that's Master Claudio. Master Claudio was a terrible villain. His whole thing was that he was going to use his powers of shapeshifting to sneak his way into Ding and Narda's life to get the stone back. But why would he train Ding how to fight? He gains absolutely nothing from this, and if anything, he wasted more time, as if 4 years of being on Earth wasn't enough. And one of his enemies got stronger because now Ding knows how to fight. If he really wanted to gain Ding's trust, he should have turned himself into one of his friends, not some old dude who knows martial arts. Week 3 also gives us the debut of Valentina, which was decent. I like that the mere sight of Valentina gave Narda some form of PTSD. Really hammers down the fact that her version of Darna isn't ready. She's scared and full of self-doubt, which allows Jane De Leon to stretch her acting muscles because I think she continues to bring a pretty stellar performance as both Narda and Darna. However, despite me liking Janela's performance as Valentina, the effects and the way she was shot is not only outdated, but really campy. Some of the effects look decent, like in the scene where she slithers out of this doorway, and I admire that they chose to show her in silhouettes first, not only hiding the not-so-decent effects, but also building tension by showing less. But when we do see her, the way she's shot doesn't make her look intimidating. Part of the reason superhero films are so successful right now is because they found a way to take the goofier concepts of the comic books, like a talking tree, and have the audience take them seriously. And you can't really take goofy concepts like a lady with snakes for hair seriously when you shoot her like this. I don't know if the whole over-the-top walk was Janela's idea or a direction given to her by one of the directors, but it ain't exactly working in my opinion. Scary and over-the-top is a very fine line to walk, and someone who masters both is Willem Dafoe as the Green Goblin. He knows when to go over the top and when to be subtle, never crossing the side of goofy or camp, and something that aids his performance is the editing and direction. Imagine if this scene from No Way Home was edited and shot like how the folks from Darna do it.
That's some neat trick. That sense of yours.
I'm sure die-hard fans of this show would want to tell people who aren't satisfied with some aspects of the show to just be okay with what we're given. But here's the thing, when you've seen better, you can never again expect anything less than that. Maybe in the early 2000s we could let certain things slide because the superhero genre was young at the time. But ever since then, the superhero genre has evolved and become much more than just campy sci-fi fantasies. And I think it's not too much to ask for this show to try and keep up. But I want to know what you guys think. If you made it this far and haven't seen Darna yet, you guys can stream Week 2 and 3 of Mars Ravelo's Darna for free on iwanttfc.com. The 4th week of Mars Ravelo's Darna is now available for streaming, so here's my review of Week 4 of Darna. Spoilers ahead. What I liked about Week 4 is that it continues what I liked about Week 3, and that it feels more like a superhero show because we continue to get more of Darna. I saw someone in the comment section say that my reviews were unbiased but shallow, because to them I missed the whole point of Week 2, that it had no Darna because Week 2 was all about developing Narda's character, which, yes, is true, but there are better, way more efficient ways to handle her character development without sacrificing her being Darna. Because the show is called Darna after all. The reason Week 2 didn't work was because after spending the entirety of Week 1 developing Narda's character, overcoming her doubts, and embracing her new role as Darna, she reverts back to pondering whether or not to be Darna, which ain't exactly the most entertaining thing to watch when you've already seen a week's load of episodes dedicated to her doing that. The trick with these superhero shows is to strike the balance between the superhero and their alter ego, something that Week 3 and 4 4 does well. You don't have to sacrifice either one of her identities to grow her character. I wasn't asking for every episode to be all about Darna and zero Narda. What I'm looking for is balance. Another thing I liked was seeing Brian and Darna work together. Their dynamic is super fun to watch, and I enjoy seeing heroes who have love interests that play an active role in the story and not just be someone for the hero to save. I also find it funny that despite how many times they work together, Brian still can't connect the dots. A blind person figured it out and she doesn't even know what she looks like. The scene where Darna visits Brian was actually really good, and Joshua Garcia's acting here was pretty good too. I mean, look at that face. We've all made that face. Something that I feel doesn't get enough recognition is the musical score. The Darna theme is really good. Just watch this scene. It's heroic and something that's easy to remember. With that being said, what I don't like, however, is the sound design. I watched the show on iWantTFC and the show there is already in its highest definition, and yet the sound is still bad. Like in this scene. Imagine watching this from a regular old TV and missing very important details of the show because the audio is bad. I've seen student films with better audio. The most guilty of this is General Borgo. Anytime he's on screen, it's hard to understand most of the things he's saying. I get that his voice is supposed to sound menacing, but there are other ways to do that. Just watch Reverse Flash from the first season of The Flash. His voice was modulated, but you could understand everything he says. Week 4 also has more of Regina dealing with the voices in her head, but it's overly edited. The show almost feels like it's compensating. Janela Salvador is acting her heart out, and we can barely focus on her performance because of the flashing lights, which I guess they thought was menacing? To be honest, it's more disorienting and seizure-inducing than it is menacing. If this was on Netflix, they would have a warning for photosensitive viewers. In episode 18, they tried tackling cyberbullying and cancel culture, but it's cancel culture through the eyes of what I can only assume is a middle-aged person who didn't grow up with social media. They have a scene dedicated to explaining how online bashing works, as if someone like Narda isn't aware of what that is. It's written in a way that's almost pandering. Like, look, here's a socially relevant topic that we've squeezed into our superhero show, and they expect us to just eat that all up and give them points for social relevancy. Plus, it never goes anywhere. Narda hears a story of a man whose entire life was ruined because of cancel culture, and the later half of the episode sees a bunch of people trying to cancel someone, but it never goes anywhere. They mention things like this, but they don't have anything to say. Having relevant issues in your story is really good, but it's one thing to just mention them and another thing to have something to say about them. You can't really call it commentary when you're not commentating. There are better ways of putting social issues in there while being smart and subtle about it. The X-Men do it all the time. It also doesn't help that this show has a very black and white way of looking at things. The heroes and villains are clear. There's no gray area, no complexities that make these larger-than-life characters feel real. Like this guy. It's almost cartoony how they write this character. To all the people who keep saying that I and everyone else who seems to agree with me keep comparing this show to Hollywood productions, I ain't doing that. They're doing that. They want to be looked upon in the same level as Hollywood productions, so you can't expect us not to expect higher of them, especially when a huge part of their marketing is telling people that this was made by master directors. If you've made it this far and you haven't seen Darna yet, you guys can stream week 4 of Mars Ravelo's Darna on iWantTFC.com. The 5th and 6th week of Mars Ravelo's Darna is now available for streaming, so here's my review of weeks 5 to 6 of Darna. Spoilers ahead. Let's start with week 5. What I liked about week 5 was Narda and Regina's relationship. Whether you belong on Team Valentina or see them as just friends, I think there's no denying that their relationship is one of the best things about the show. Another thing I liked about week 5 was the death of Killer Ghost. Killer Ghost ain't exactly the best written character on the show, but his death scene was pretty creative, and I gotta give him points for that. You have a character who can walk through walls, and the way he gets defeated is he gets shot and phases through a wall, but gets caught in between mid-phase. Now that's some pretty dark imagery for a show targeted at families. Week 5 also features the return of everyone's favorite villain, Master Claudio. After surviving getting eaten by a lizard, he now wants revenge on General Borgo, because apparently he had a child who was killed by General Borgo off screen. I know in my last review I was talking about the show's lack of morally gray characters, and I guess Master Claudio is transitioning into that, but the way they did it was so rushed that it doesn't give you enough time or context to actually care for this character's change of heart. Master Claudio had a complete 180, and we don't really feel the change he went through. They bring up that he had a child out of nowhere and that Borgo apparently killed this child, but we knew nothing about this man or the life he had before coming to Earth, so why should we care? This supposed family man apparently had no problem taking somebody else's parent, so where is all of this coming from? His confrontation with Borgo had some of the worst written exposition I've seen in a while. Another thing I found quite funny was Lolo Rolando's character. This guy can just do everything. He's a bibingka vendor, a scientist, and now a kung fu master. Is there anything this guy can't do? What's he hiding under that bucket hat? Week 5 also focuses a lot more on Noah the incel Ballesteros. And I'm not sure if there are any fans of this character, but I personally really don't like him. He's like a less interesting version of Harry Osborn, and every time we cut to his little segment of the show, I groan internally. With all the stuff that's going on in the show, his parts seem out of place. We don't really get a sense of how his character fits into the overall story, and his scenes play out the same way all the time. He's either fighting with his dad or simping for Narda. At least with Mayor Zaldi, you could laugh at how cartoony this guy is written, but with Noah, there's just nothing entertaining about him. And in a show that has superheroes, a lady with snakes for hair, corrupt cops, and other, more interesting characters, his story is the least interesting, and it almost feels like we're killing time, waiting for when we get to the good parts. I also don't like that this show is trying to get us to root for him, because Noah has this endearing scene with Narda that sorta implies that he might actually be some sort of a romantic contender for Narda, which, again, is the type of thing that can only happen in a show written by what I can only assume is a middle-aged person who did not grow up with social media. In what universe does this creepy loner who watches Narda's live stream in the dark actually have a chance or even be friends with her? After all the creepy stuff he's done, the only way I can see him become interesting is if he becomes a villain. MJ from the Spider-Man comics has a bunch of interesting stories about stalkers coming after her, and I think this show would have an opportunity to actually say something about the dangers of social media and how some people can't distinguish reality from the parasocial relationship they share with online creators. The other route I can see them taking is he sacrifices himself for Narda, which again is the most simp nation thing to do, and I hope they don't take that route because it's pretty predictable. Now that we're done with week 5, let's talk about week 6. Week 6 sees the return of Lara, the blind girl who Narda rescued and who knows that Narda is Darna, and they just killed her off. I wish I could say I felt the emotions that they were trying to get me to feel, but her death was handled so poorly. There was no tension, no buildup, no moment where you wondered if she was ever going to make it. It was pretty straightforward. She just gets stabbed right there, which honestly was kind of a waste. Something I did like about week 6 was Kuya Gardo. He's one of the side characters in the show, but this time around we get to see his backstory and how he ties in with this week's villain, Clone Man. And I gotta say, his backstory was pretty interesting. Unlike Master Claudio, Kuya Gardo is a morally gray character who was written well, because the show actually took its time to flesh out his backstory. With that being said, Clone Man, on the other hand, wasn't as interesting. Sure, he had almost the same backstory as Kuya Gardo, but he wasn't as compelling or even threatening as a villain. I also find it comical that a lot of the villains in this show wear bucket hats. Anyone who wears a bucket hat on this show is either a villain or a shady old person with secrets. Slithering her way into week 6 is Valentina, and I'm not gonna lie, her reveal this week was pretty good. I like that they kept her hidden in the shadows. Sure, the wacky over-the-top zoom-ins are still there, but unlike her previous appearance, it wasn't jarring or seizure-inducing, and it didn't feel like it was overcompensating. And not gonna lie, Janella's Valentina voice is doing things to me.
Hello, Judge.
Miss Janela, pwede niyo po ako saktan.
I could go on about how the effects are still not at Hollywood level like they marketed it to be, or that Little Miss has super strength, can lift up a billboard with one hand, can't seem to lift Brian Roblox, but you don't need me to point that out. If they're really convinced that the costume and effects are the best that they can do, and that the teleserye format is the best way to tell their story, then the least they can do is write better stories. They have a menagerie of talented people working on this, and it'd be a shame to see their talents go to waste on Wattpad-esque writing and dialogue. If you guys made it this far and haven't seen Darna yet, you guys can stream week 5 and 6 of Mars Ravelo's Darna on iwanttfc.com. The 7th week of Mars Ravelo's Darna is now available for streaming, so here's my review of week 7 of Darna. Spoilers ahead. Week 7 was no doubt Valentina's week. The focus on her was really nice and made the show somewhat exciting because with her, she brings a very interesting topic of debate, especially for the Philippines. Darna wants to lock up criminals while Valentina kills criminals. It's a battle of morals that we've seen before and maybe even done better elsewhere, but to see it in a show for mainstream Filipino audiences was kinda surprising. The show ain't exactly subtle with how they bring you its message, but if anything, I sure do hope that this encourages the masses to think about the things the show is presenting to them. I also like Valentina's costume. Sure, the CGI is still questionable, but in terms of costume design, I think her costume is really cool. And I really appreciate that it's not overly sexualized. The comics, particularly the Mango Comics run, over-sexualized her a lot, and I like that they didn't go that route with this one. I love the scaly texture the suit has, and it looks very modern. But for every step forward, we take one huge step back, because in week 7, we find out what General Borgo's entire plan is. General Borgo's big plan is to rule the world. Who would have thought? Of course that's what he wants to do. Just when you thought he couldn't be more one-dimensional. And it's not like in a sophisticated Dr. Doom kind of way where he truly believes that the world would be a better place if he ruled over it. He just really wants to be powerful. How does this dude even have followers? Everyone in his little army is just in agreement to make this guy the most powerful person in the universe? And for what exactly? He wasn't trying to stop the problems caused by overpopulation like Thanos, nor is he trying to find a new home for his people like General Zod. He just wants to be powerful for some reason. The best villains are the ones that challenge the hero morally. And it's a shame that General Borgo is just another mustache-twirling villain who has petty goals, because he is the big bad after all. Not gonna lie, you guys, I started writing this review back in Friday, but as soon as I started writing it, I just felt tired. So tired I took a few days off from making this video because I really wanted to get this video out last Saturday, but my mind was blank. I feel like I'm running out of things to say about this show, and to be honest, I don't know how much more of this I can do. I tried to be fair to this show, point out the things I liked about it, but to dedicate so much time and effort to a show that isn't really sparking anything in me just feels wrong. At what point does it no longer become a fair review and it just becomes a video where I make fun of somebody else's work? I don't want to do that, and I'm pretty sure there's a whole bunch of people on the internet who make a living making fun of somebody else's work, and I don't want to be that guy. I'll still try to watch this show, maybe up until Valentina and Darna finally fight, but I don't know if I want to keep making videos about it anymore. I kinda just want to do other things and not be a one-trick pony. But to everyone who's been here since week 1, I just want to say thank you for being here. Thanks for watching the reviews and contributing to the conversation. I hope you guys still stick around, and if this is the end of the Darna videos, I think 7's a nice little number to end on. But hey, if the show somehow improves and reignites something in me again, I'll be there. But if you made it this far and you haven't seen Darna yet, as always, you guys can stream week 7 of Mars Ravelo's Darna on iwanttfc.com.